This is a program from Future Foods, which is a collaboration between ourselves at BIC Innovation and Aberystwyth University, sponsored by the Welsh Government and WEFO through EU funding. And we're also partnering with Nutri Wales, our food and drink cluster focused on R&D in Wales. If we'd like to start, let's start off the seminar. So I'll hand over to Natalie to start showing some what I think is really interesting info.
Rod, good morning. So I'm going to take you through an overview of different protein applications, functions, and opportunities that you can find within foods and drinks. So I'm going to jump straight into the global overview. So protein you haven't been able to escape, especially the last few years. It's absolutely boomed, and there's so many different markets that it kind of encompasses or is a part of. So within the UK, the health and wellbeing industry was 24.1 billion, and that was in 2019, and it's expected to grow by an extra billion within the next year. So again, absolutely huge, and protein is a big part of that. The global wellness market is into the trillions, and again, protein foods, whilst that isn't the whole market, it is certainly a big player within that. Globally, the protein ingredients market is about 29 billion, and again, that's looking to grow about 7.5% over the next 5 years. And also the plant-based market, as you know, is kind of growing hugely, and that's something that we're really going to be talking about again today. And that's looking to grow almost double by 2025. So really, really huge. The sports nutrition market has mainly been kind of the forefront of protein in the past, but that now has kind of been sidelined, and now it's much more of a lifestyle nutrition or just general nutrition that people are wanting to eat more and more protein. So within the UK, the key areas that people are looking for, the Google searches over 2018 was actually 102 million searches of anything that comprised of foods, that protein or protein foods to buy. So absolutely huge amount of people that are looking for these particular foods. Around half of consumers are reportedly trying to look for extra protein or trying to add extra protein within their diet. And protein-rich foods have seen one of the biggest market growths, also alongside gut health. That seems to be very, very huge as well. So foods that are even naturally high in protein are also kind of being sold as protein-boosted versions. So you might see cheese, yogurt, they're all having added extra protein, although they're already high protein products. But also there's a mass of, say, protein noodles, protein coffee, protein water. You know, there's a huge amount of products that are out there, and snacking seems to be one of the biggest ones. So protein really has been the left macronutrient that's been kind of left standing, that's still really positive, and fat has been given a little bit of a bad ride over the last few years. Again, absolutely essential for the diet, and it's beginning to come back into favour over the last few years. Carbohydrates then got the big kind of bashing, again kind of looking at its response with glucose, etc. But again, people I think are beginning to get a bit more balanced with it, but protein has been the one macronutrient that has been the forefront with any dietary model. Protein still remains to be there. So why protein? So there's a multitude of different trends that are really kind of pushing everything along at the moment. But one of the biggest is that the population growth to 9.7 billion by 2050. And we are looking for more protein sources in order to feed these people and make sure that there isn't any malnutrition. There are experts that do suggest that actually we do produce enough protein already. It's just that a lot of it is in with waste streams, which could be better utilised. But plant-based and vegan proteins seem to be the biggest categories that are growing, as are dairy and welfare-fed animal proteins. So the health and wellness trends are the primary engines for the growth of the protein market, and there's a great write-up here. Again, on the other slide pack that you'll receive has a little bit more information, and that's mainly because people can actually recall the benefits of protein. Where often, for example, if you were to pick out, say, omega-3, a lot of people can't necessarily put their finger on why it's good for them. They know it might be, but they don't know why. Whereas protein, automatically, people can think of a couple of reasons. So the main nutritional attributes of protein that people can recall. So again, there's multiple others, and some of them may be kind of quite broad with what people are looking at. But many apps that are out there at the moment that you can download on your phone or access anywhere will give you a rough indication of how much protein you need. So it's really kind of reminding people how much they should be having per day. Protein has 4 calories per gram, same as carbohydrate, but again, fat has 9. So again, when you look at it as a calorie conservation kind of project, then protein would be favoured. It's low glycemic load, so for the same portion as what you would have for a carb-heavy meal, it's going to have a less response onto your blood glucose. But having said that, if you do have a very high intake of protein and a low energy expenditure, then it will be converted by glyconeogenesis. Increasing your protein intake will help you feel less hungry, so it kind of increases your satiety. It increases your muscle protein synthesis, protects muscle mass, and protects against muscle loss. It also aids dietary induced thermogenesis, so this will increase your metabolic rate after eating, not significantly, but it's certainly more than carbohydrates and fats. So those were the main things that people could recall when you were talking to them. With a survey that looked into UK population, so this was done by the British Nutrition Foundation, and also looking at the Nutrition and Diet Survey, they were asking, it's about 20,000 people, and they're just saying, what was your first choice of protein? So not to say that that's all they eat, but it is what they kind of went for first of all. And as you can see, is animal proteins make up to 97% of that. But what's significant is 3% of people said that a vegan protein was their first choice, bearing in mind that veganism is about 1.16% of the population. So actually it's a big shift that people are looking at. On the graph on the other side, it's quite interesting as well, and we will touch on this a little bit later when we're getting through the slides, is that people are trying to eat more seafood and fish. So there seems to be quite a large movement at the minute called veganism. Whether that'll take off as a word, I don't know, but it's just where people are looking to eat more responsibly sourced seafood. But there's a huge reduction in people trying to reduce their intake of processed meats, red meats, again, generally due to kind of health associations that have been in the media. And within that, we're seeing that there's more pulses, beans, nuts, seeds that are being increased as well. So having a little focus on plant-based proteins, just kind of investigating why they've been so successful. And again, they tick multiple boxes. First of all, people see them as being much safer than animal proteins. They're seeing them as being more natural as well. But the main influence is it's to maintain a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle. So it's that kind of aspiration that they're entering into. You also find that there's less allergens, even though there are allergens. So soy is quite a big allergen, but it's less, and it fits many more diets. So again, flexitarian, vegan, meat reduction. It also fits within higher ethics and sustainability within people. Interestingly, soy seems to be something that people are stepping away from, again, looking at kind of the land use, and also that it is an allergen. So with products, we're absolutely awash of so many different protein products that are out there. This is purely kind of the beginning of a search, and there are multiple others that you can find. It does seem to be dominated by snacks and cereals, which is quite key, and we will come on to those in a moment. But even things like, you see the chicken slices in the middle, they've literally just stuck on a label to say that there's 50 grams of protein per tub, and automatically people are recognizing that even though nothing has changed, it's already a very, very high protein product. So snacks seem to be really, really increasing. And from a survey, 37% of consumers said actually that one of their snacks per day was providing one of the most nutritious intakes, which could be seen as slightly scary, but also I think it makes a really responsibility from people that are making those snacks to make them very nutritious, and rather than just aspirational, to include the nutrients there. So if we're just going to focus on two different types of products, here I've just picked up two which are really, really familiar. I think we're all familiar with both brands, so the Weetabix and the Mars. Both have come up with a protein alternative. So again, as you can see with the ingredients, there's quite a difference, particularly with the Mars protein, of what's added into it. But protein foods do seem to be a little bit exempt of the trend of where people want to have clean labels. It's not so much an issue when it comes to protein. People are quite happy to see those increased ingredients on there. So with the Weetabix, we're looking at about 7 extra grams of protein per serving. With the Mars, there's actually 10 times more protein. With the Mars bar, they've also reduced sugar by half, they've reduced fat by half, and there's less overall carbohydrates. So actually, as a formulation, I was quite impressed with Mars. I was expecting kind of go, oh, that was a bit nonsensy, but actually it's quite a good reformulation. And the same with Weetabix. They just added the extra of their key ingredients. So most of their extra protein is coming from wheat protein. And again, fortified as well. From that as well, they're looking kind of to see an extra rise in sales. So they were seeing with the Weetabix that it would bring an extra 7 million. And with Mars, they saw a growth of from 20 to 23%. So it certainly is kind of a license to increase the cost. Also with Weetabix as well, so your normal 24 pack is £2.20, and with the protein Weetabix, it's £2.70, so an extra 50p. With the Mars, you're looking at about 69 pence a Mars bar. Oh, there's quite a few searches that I did over the last few weeks, and you can get 3 for £1.20. But if you were to buy the protein version, it's between £1.99 and £2.99 per bar. So you can really see there's a massive, massive difference. But if you were to make healthy swaps, especially as people are snacking more, then actually, you can make better choices. So it does give you those options, but certainly comes at a cost. So when we think of protein, or certainly when I think of protein, I think kind of the protein isolates or the protein powders, and there's such a wealth and such a huge amount of variety out there. So each of these brands have also then got their plant-based brands just on the other side. So most of the plant proteins will come from rice, pea, potato, sunflower, for example. And then you've got the whey, casein, so your animal or your bovine derived. You can also get sheep protein and goat protein. But when you're selecting whether you want to have a plant-based protein or whether you want to have an animal-based protein, most people, and this was from a Mintel and NutriIngredients study, they were asking people, what do you look for? And they were saying, well, we just look for the protein content. So they thought that's all well and good, but they're not actually looking at kind of what the amino acids are that make up that protein. So most people wouldn't eat the same food every day or for every meal. So it's not necessarily a concern. But we are seeing more people become more dependent on smaller amounts of foods, whether it's due to dietary restriction or just what they're accessing. So it really is important to consider as a food kind of producer that you're formulating with foods that will give a complete amino acid profile. Again, with that one, it's kind of showing you 8 of the essential amino acids. Tryptophan was quite hard to find, but you can see on there that potato protein is particularly good and actually meets the basic needs. Whereas things like soy just meet it. So again, that's what's being touted as being a particularly good source. But again, it just meets the threshold of leucine. And then also you see others kind of are very good at combining. So pea and rice are particularly good at protein because what one is lacking, the other one is a little higher. So it's not to say that you can't make a complete protein out of plants. You just need to really look at your formulation. So factors with this is you usually find as well that the plant-based protein is a little bit more heat stable. So again, really good for baking. So you find a lot of people start making protein pancakes. There was quite an impressive female that is on Instagram, and she does protein pow, and she'll show you how to make all really wonderful foods using different proteins. And from her following, you'll also see that the plant-based protein is a little bit more functional with heating, but whey protein still remains king within the sports nutrition side. Consumers are looking as well more so for a complete amino acid profile, particularly if it's lifestyle or sports driven. So again, you need to know your market of what you want to have there and what you're claiming. So that's all essential if you want to then to kind of make the most out of protein, muscle protein synthesis. So kind of as a very brief and whistle-stop tour, we're looking for the average population needs about 1.75 grams of protein per kilogram per day. Now, obviously that's for someone that's fit and well and doesn't have any underlying health problems. Obviously, if there are, so you do get people that can't have higher protein diets, and again, they'll generally be looked after by a dietitian. But after exercise, if we're purely going to be looking at an athlete's based, then you're looking for within kind of 30 to 45 minutes for that athlete to have a protein or carbohydrate, especially after resistance training. So then you can activate your mTOR pathway, so your mammalian target of rapamycin, and that happens within the cell, but that can only be initiated if you have an insulin response, hence the carbs, and an amino acid profile that's complete there. That then initiates your protein synthesis and makes the muscle much more adaptable. The picture at the top, the little green squiggles, so they're your muscle cell. And interestingly, after exercise or after a whey protein meal, you often find that the GLUT4, so your glucose receptors, rise to the top of the muscle cell and enable a better uptake from the bloodstream. So it does show that each kind of work very much in tandem to initiate that response of muscle protein synthesis. Casein, again, from bovine milk, also forms little myocells within the stomach. So it literally sits in the stomach and it's a little bit slower release. So particularly useful for different populations that are looking for maybe kind of a food that will keep them full for longer and drip feed them with protein for a longer purpose. But muscle protein synthesis isn't just for active individuals or resistance trained individuals. It's absolutely fundamental for all populations. and particularly for aging populations and those to prevent sarcopenia. So sarcopenia is kind of roughly translated into loss of flesh. So it's when you're having a reduced muscle or having high muscle wastage. And you find with that, then you kind of become less anabolic, more catabolic, and your body then will increase its body fat levels. So you're kind of getting that kind of negative effect of less muscle tissue, higher fat tissue. When we come to older populations as well, we don't want to have that 0.7 grams roughly per day as a target. So they should really be exceeding that. And there's been quite a lot of research kind of looking at different ideal intakes. But again, we want to be having that distributed throughout the day. Obviously, as you get older, appetite begins to go, the uptake of nutrition in the intestines begins to go. And also you might have kind of dental problems, which makes it particularly tricky to eat a chewy bar or kind of eat a steak, for example. So out there at the moment, so you generally have quite bland looking shakes, which seem to be the norm that are there for older populations. But again, there's no reason why you couldn't have kind of a whey or casein shake, which would work particularly well. So you've got that quick uptake of protein from whey, but you've then also got that sustained release for casein. And ideally you want to be eating little and often. But if you can't do that, or if someone just isn't feeling that they could, then something with a combination of whey and casein will give you that relay of protein for a prolonged time. Alternatively, something like Greek yogurt would work particularly well. Or I found here some protein soup, which I don't know if that sounds that appetizing or not, but it's kind of a little bit of a powder, mix it with water, and it's just convenient as well. It's something that you can think about getting. So of the ones that we're going to see at the moment, there's also some really exciting emerging markets as well that are coming across. But there's new plant-based proteins that are emerging all the time. So long as it's got a small amount of protein within it, technically it can be extracted, but it's the cost of the extraction really which kind of dictates whether it's going to become popular or not. Algae, again, if you were tuned in last week, we spoke a little bit about algae and then its use within protein, insects protein, and cellular agriculture. And these kind of novel alternative protein sources have emerged via several new technologies. So again, reiterating from last week is that algae protein or microalgae protein is very, very high in protein. It's about 70% content. It has a very high amino acid profile, and it's very high in bioactive compounds. The thing with spirulina powder that's here, it's very deep green and it's quite overpowering to taste, so you wouldn't necessarily want it as a whole drink, but you often find now that within plant-based proteins, it has a small percentage of spirulina powder in there, mainly because of its bioactive compounds. So potato protein is one that personally really interests me. It's become more and more popular, and it's already on the market, but it still is emerging as something that's taking over a little bit more of soy. So you see potato starch being used in anything from the bulgur in sausages to being used in grated cheese to stop them from sticking together. So if you looked in the cupboard, you're probably going to find it in many, many things, in crisps, for example, as well, and confectionery. So as a byproduct of that, you get potato protein, which can then be extracted, and it has a really high protein content. So it rivals whey with that. So you're looking for 70 to 80% when it's isolated. It has a very good amino acid profile. It's complete. And there's been quite a lot of research that only emerged at the beginning of this year regarding potato protein on females. And they were looking at 2 servings of 25 grams would give them 1.4 grams of leucine per day. So actually that does meet the amino acid requirement. It was also meeting valine, isoleucine, and other amino acids there. So actually it's quite impressive. It can also be used as an egg replacer, really good powder formulation. It's allergen free. So again, it's very, very versatile. So another one is insects. So again, I think we've heard quite a lot of insects over the last few years. As an animal feed and as a human food. Again, looking at the 2 different pictures on there, you can see that whole crickets probably aren't the most appetizing thing to be crunching on, but once you kind of see it in a powder, it looks no different to like a wholemeal flour, which is kind of a deep brown flour. So I don't think then it would be too off-putting. Very high yield of protein per metre squared, and very, very sustainable. And many welfare groups don't see it as animal cruelty, or see it much less, as they usually reduce the temperature. So allow the insects then to go into a hibernation stage, and then they'll be frozen. So a lot of people don't see it as that, just kind of taking an animal to an abattoir, for example. Looking on the graph there, you can see that crickets have very similar profile of protein to beef, pork or chicken, but they have a very high amount of iron. So that could be particularly interesting for females, for example, that are often very deficient in iron, or older populations, and very low in saturated fat. and low carbohydrate, and really good amino acid profile. People that have been eating them refer to them as having a nutty taste. So I don't know about that, but again, it kind of implies that it's quite a nice thing to be cooking with. So we already see a lot of meat alternatives on the market at the moment, and we personally have tried a few over the last few months, more so than ever, just because that's what's been left on the shelves. That at the minute that they do get a good reception, and people are saying actually they taste pretty good. But 39% of consumers do say they're a little bit bored of them, and they're saying that sometimes they're a little bit too processed. So, and also a lot of people are saying that they look like a meat, and actually that could be a plus or a minus depending on kind of what angle you're coming from. If you're wanting to have a barbecue, then okay, it probably works quite well as having a burger-esque kind of a meal. But if you're vegan and you're not wanting to eat a meat product, then you don't necessarily want a food that resembles meat. So again, I think there's many more opportunities to make it a bit more fun, or to make it a little bit more, say, vegan friendly. Fortification is often used. That's not often a bad thing within this kind of realm. Since kind of the plant-based milks, you often find that fortification is very well received within flexitarians and vegans because they kind of accept that it needs to be done. The functional ingredients which are there are different to meat. So what you see is more fibre content, there'll be more phytonutrients, but it's not necessarily a replacement. So again, similar to kind of the milk analogy, is that you need to make sure that you're either not selling them as an alternative, you're selling them as an alternative, but not necessarily as a nutrient equivalent. They could be better, they could be worse. But again, just making sure that the nutrients within them are representing what that person might be avoiding. So cultured meat is a really interesting one. There's been a massive amount of investment, and they simply take a cell and they grow it and then make it to form either a burger or a chicken breast here or whatever meat they're trying to make. But there's been quite a lot of controversy. So it hasn't been approved in any country at the moment, but we do accept that at some point it probably will, just because the amount of investment that's been put into it. The Americans have done quite a lot of research into it. And really interestingly, it was the 30 to 39 cohort of people that actually they would be quite interested in taking it or eating it. So 60%, 51% of people between 18 and 29, so they're actually quite open to it. But the 55 plus really didn't want to be eating it at all. There was also another question that was posed to a group of over 2,000 people, and they were saying to them, if the price was the same, would you eat or would you choose a cultured meat? And you could almost say it was actually slightly more favourable to agree that they did say that they would have one, or they would pick it, but it's not a significant difference between the two. So I think that the jury is still out a little bit there. But again, something to really watch. So within animal protein, we've kind of focused a little bit more on plant-based. But if you're looking at kind of increasing the value of animal protein, it's really focusing on whether it's grass-fed seems to be particularly really watched. You're also looking as well for different accreditation. So we're seeing more and more that the flexitarians who are reducing their meat consumption but still eating meat, but they want to see better welfare within the animals. So is it free range? Is it grass-fed? Where is it coming from? What is its provenance? So Icon Whey have really capitalised on this, and they say they're 100% grass-fed whey. There's various different studies as well that have come into grass-fed to see kind of what the difference is a bit. Is it better than a corn-fed? And actually, nutritional studies at the moment have said that they are slightly better. You're seeing kind of higher, better fatty acid profiles are really the main thing. So again, it's something to look out for, and maybe something to add value to. Also, hybrid foods. So you think of hybrids sometimes as something new or novel, but if you think of a sausage already, that is going to be maybe not plant-based, but it's got a filler in it, and then it's got a meat content. Even say like a strawberry yogurt, still got the strawberry there. It's also then got the animal protein in it as well. So there's no reason why you can't look at both. And again, that's kind of really meeting the biggest amount of consumers at the moment who are the flexitarian market or the meat eaters. So organic is really being looked into, rainforest assured, forest assured, and what those animals are being fed. So again, soy once again is being really shown as something to look for an alternative. Insects have been something that have really taken off, particularly with marine animals. And people are looking to actually really increase their chicken consumption, and I'll come on to that a little bit more in a moment. So from some Kantar insights that were done for Welsh Government, that we had the privilege of looking at not so long ago, they really kind of pulled out a few key points for us to look at, which was really interesting. So the functionalities of food have been much more considered by consumers. Again, online purchasing has really increased. And a lot of the time people aren't typing into their search. For example, they want say chicken or a protein-based, plant-based food, they're just looking for the attributes of that. So they're searching via a different mechanism. Baking has become much more in home, and then people, it's really kind of shocked to the roof. I think you've probably seen that when you've looked for flour and you can't find any. And you can see that with the statistics at the top. You know, ready meals, not necessarily a thing of the past, but people aren't relying on them so much. They're trying new recipes and they're trying to be healthier. And they're also treating themselves less. So again, if you're looking kind of for a protein snack or a protein alternative that's more nutritious, then actually that could fit really well into its snacking area and be less deemed as a treat. Coming out of lockdown, it's really seen that health will be a major trend, and it already has been, so that will continue. Breakfast occasions has gone up, so where some people would have run out the door quickly and got to work, you actually find that now there's about 9% more breakfast occasions. And I personally feel that this is something where older generations would tap in really, really well. You often find that cereals or general cereals are very carb heavy, but if you could get a little bit of protein in at breakfast, you've already then initiated for that older person to get some protein in early on, and then it kind of keeps that nitrogen balance up throughout the day. Lunch occasions have gone up by 90%. Again, people aren't kind of buying sandwiches or whatnot on the go. So again, something that kind of fills that void would be a great opportunity. Evening meals, again, have gone up. So with regards to chicken, which I kind of hinted on earlier, we're seeing that there's been a much rise in chicken consumption. But that's because we're seeing people avoiding red meat. So going back to the graph or the much earlier on, which was saying how people were reducing their red meat intake and then replacing it with chicken. But also those people that are plant-based have been moving to chicken as well, because they see this as being much more functional. So again, chicken, that it is well fed and possibly organic, is certainly an area to get into. So again, multiple opportunities, and it has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour. But again, there's so many different areas that protein really can be tapped into. Sports still kind of remain the most kind of fundamental thing within protein, and it does seem to be dominated by whey. Dairy has been up by about 15%, and that's generally due to the Greek yogurts trend, so kind of high protein trends. But I personally feel that the bigger opportunities come within the older generations, or making foods at home, so whether you're kind of making baby foods or kind of children's foods for infants that are kind of following on. The idea of cultured meat has had such an extensive amount of money put into it, you expect to see something coming out of the other end. Also, when we're looking at the pandemic, we're also looking at an obesity pandemic, and whilst still by eating too much protein is certainly going to increase your body fat levels, but protein could be an alternative or slight alternative to carbohydrate-rich meals. So again, it's kind of manipulating those ratios of food that you're eating each day, all coming down to different extraction technologies and kind of utilising the animal proteins, animal feeds, and putting onto the environmental and sustainable welfare there. There's certainly going to be a demand, an increased demand for plant-based protein, and we don't foresee that going away at all. There we are. I'll say a bit of a whistle-stop tour, a little bit of everything kind of going on. And again, any questions are really, really welcome. And there is a white paper, and we will share the slides if anybody's interested.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natalie. As you say, lots of info there. And my sort of takeaway is this protein trend is here for a while yet. It's not something that's going to disappear or be faddy. It's something that's a real underpinning. And I'm quite sort of shocked or impressed with the sort of profit levels that some unusual, brands which you wouldn't link with protein have sort of jumped on the bandwagon. The Mars bars and the Weetabix to be on that trend. The other bit I thought which is interesting is that not all proteins are equal. It's under a banner. It's about the uptake. It's about the quality of the amino acids. A couple of questions I've got, but if anyone else listening in has got the questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll pick them up in a second. Yeah, the sort of first one I was sort of thinking is, out of those opportunity areas you were looking at, and Louise, if you want to join in on this, really, where do you think the greatest opportunities are around protein? And I can see that there's opportunities in, from seafood, dairy. You're showing the trends in chicken alternatives. Where would you? What do you think's the standout opportunities?
Span across, it's certainly kind of, as much as we talk a lot about plant-based protein, and that really is growing absolutely hugely, but it is animal protein as well. But people are looking for much more kind of welfare assured meats or better fed animals. But I think the opportunity area itself would also be kind of the aging population, and a lot of people kind of think of that as people that are perhaps in their 80s, 90s, etc. But really, that begins, sad to say, but kind of in kind of 30s. It's a little bit like the bone density. So you don't want to be a female and worry about it kind of in your late 50s. You want to be taking into account in your teens, because that's kind of laying the foundations. But unfortunately, be the last thing that people want to think about at that time. So I think it's kind of getting those foundations, but ensuring that products are being created that are actually helpful to health and not necessarily just kind of a bit of a gimmick. I think that's kind of the pitfall that could be or is already seen in some products.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think as well, it's looking at that outside of animal protein, it's looking at other natural alternatives. I think there's been a lot of focus on protein shakes and powders and bars, and I think a lot of the time consumers think they've obviously been highly formulated, they could be quite processed, and it's actually providing an education to the consumer for the likes of dairy products and what they can actually offer. And then also, I think insects have got a hugely exciting future, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad. But we see in Europe that the likes of the Auchan supermarket chain have been selling salmon that's been fed on insects, and they're actually promoting it, and it's proved to be really successful, rolling out to more stores. So there doesn't seem to be a consumer barrier to the fact that animals or seafood, etc., have been fed with insects. There doesn't seem to be a problem for the consumer there already. So I think rather than eating a roast cricket as a snack, which might be a step too far, but actually using it as animal feed might be more of an opportunity. And it goes back to that alternative to soya, a little bit of a more sustainable, future-proofed option, I think.
Yeah. No, I read about seeing the insect-fed trout, isn't it? Where and people equate it almost to grass-fed meats. Quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's some production facilities, so they're producing foods and then they're putting an insect production site on the side of their facility. So it's starting to provide that circular economy, sustainable option as well.
Yeah. Just going back on the comments around sort of proteins and, if you like, healthy aging, I think it's a really interesting area where the requirement for protein through adult life really is what you're saying is key, and it gets more important the older you are. Obviously linked with exercise.
Yes, you've got to have that stimulants.
I can't just eat my 20 protein Mars bars a day and think I'm going to be okay. I need to have that stimulus, and I've got to look at the qualities. I'm getting that message. But I think one thing and projects I've been on, I think one of the challenges sometimes is marketing on actually things people don't want to accept. I know I'm one about the aging process. I've heard that people mostly think they're 10 years younger than they are. I don't know if you've got thoughts on actually how the product should be marketed.
Also of habit forming, so kind of habit forming later on in life. And also, if you're buying a protein powder or something, you don't necessarily need to buy an age specific or a formulation that's age specific. It could be something that kind of fits well across the board. So then you don't have to kind of address that subject later on in life and actually go, oh, now you're of a certain age, and now I've got to buy that older protein. I think it's forming good habits, but also education is absolutely key to make sure that people are getting in the good sources. Absolutely have a few treats along the way, but ensuring that those foundations are laid.
Yeah, I with what you're saying. One of the things I was thinking, how we think about like antioxidants and things like that, or we could be thinking in the same sort of way. This is a good thing for me to be having. I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have come into the the chat function. So let me just have a little.
Well, just one thing I was just going to point out is actually that people really should be aspiring to have a healthy lifespan, not just an extended lifespan. So I think that's kind of the difference, is kind of making sure that those aspirations are actually transferred into people's lives.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do this in order they've come in. So thank you, Louise. I can see you've jumped in here. Would the example of protein fortified yogurt be an ideal post-exercise snack rather than a protein shake? Would the yogurt be better than a protein shake?
I wouldn't say it's better, but I'd say it's equally as good. What you're looking for is after exercises that you're wanting something that's taken very, very quickly. So this is why whey works particularly well, because it gets into the bloodstream quite quickly and then kind of initiates your mTOR pathway. As it's made up of the same thing as what yogurt is, then absolutely it's a really good alternative. And knowing people within industry, they'll have either or both. So yes, they're both very good. You don't necessarily have to go down a certain product, but they're already foods that are out there that do the job nicely.
It was interesting seeing you stuff. Whey seems to be the protein, so you can see why it becomes the shakes and things like that. But there's so many other sources, and if you're bringing in taste and texture and enjoyment, then there's playing on that actually that there's a good protein content in that. Should stand out. The other one, just leading on from that, is I was interested in the comments about when you should be having protein and the snacking bit. Do you think there's opportunities around that area for product?
So I think for all populations, but again, particularly older populations, but starting young, again, that makes sense, is kind of getting your protein drip fed throughout the day. So instead of having, these large meals, let's say, for instance, of spaghetti bolognese, for example, which have a big amount of kind of mince in them, is if you were having kind of little bits and drip fed the body, that works very, very well, particularly if you're someone, again, older person that doesn't have a great appetite, because it just allows that kind of that drip feed and gets it early on. So the actual idea of having protein fortified cereal, I think, is quite a good idea. The bioavailability of that protein, I don't know. So again, it all depends kind of where that's coming from. But if you can get it in early, it just kind of, rather than having those bigger meals, which again, your body can't break down all of that at once, and it can make you extremely sleepy. So you can get it in little enough to use. It's certainly kind of, I think, the way forward.
Yeah. Right, we've got one from Jenny here, which was, what are your thoughts about the hidden allergen aspects that are identified with pea protein isolate for peanut allergy sufferers? Do you think there are hidden problems with other protein isolates?
I think that's a really good question. Actually, as a peanut allergy myself, I certainly can't eat pea protein or any legumes. So I would kind of keep away from that. So, also soy kind of becomes into that realm as well. So again, you've got to be quite picky with what you are selecting to ensure that those allergens aren't there. Pea doesn't seem to have quite as an allergenic effect as peanuts, but it certainly has, especially if anyone's got very sensitivity to those allergies, then you would want to be avoiding them. And this is where I think, again, potato protein is particularly useful because it's deemed as allergen free. So far, it's not seen that there's people with potato or potato isolate allergies, and it's very versatile. So you can cook with it, you can heat it up, you can pop it in a bar. It's stable. So I think that's quite a good alternative. But potentially, if you're concentrating something, that then there are potentials that there are going to be other allergens that will emerge.
Yeah. Thanks. I was getting the hint that you're quite a fan of this potato protein, which really surprises me. I don't equate potato as a protein source. You think everyone in the car.
When people first talked about it, I thought it was almost a bit of a joke. And then actually when you see that it was a waste stream, it just seemed to tick so many boxes kind of as a sustainable, environmental. But again, to say allergen free, and just from myself, I was kind of trying to select something that was allergen free. So potato works very well. And it has a really good amino acid profile. You still see that whey and casein is certainly, it has the highest of the protein and protein availability amino acid scores. But the trials on potato do seem to be particularly high. I'm sure there'll be another one that comes across that's rivals potato. But
and then equally, if we're looking at soy, which has been imported, and the impacts of soy, and for the UK, potato, we can get potatoes.
I think most people like the humble potato. It's not seen as being the baddie.
Yeah.
It's quite innocent.
Yeah.
It's just getting value from the whole product as well, isn't it? You know, utilising those waste streams is going to become more and more important. So.
Really interesting. Jenny went on to another question, which I think we've answered, which was what do you think of about insects as part of fish's natural diet? I think we commented on that actually that's where we probably see. I'm talking to the panel here.
Yeah, as Jenny says, it's a natural part of the fish diet anyway. It's just that we're putting it through a cultivated process rather than part of the natural process.
Yeah, it seems a good way to move forward on that.
Yeah.
Then I've got a question from Jeff. Does the UK diet generally lack enough protein, or is it the quality of protein? And why is this?
The Western world generally isn't protein deficient, which is why it's particularly interesting that protein has become so kind of popular, because it's not necessarily anything that younger generations are lacking. Again, quality is really important, and that often, as we're going down more of a plant-based route, which is great, but you're also finding that people become a little bit too reliant on processed proteins. But also as you get older, again, kind of keep going on about the older aging, but I think that is the area where people do become protein malnourished. So it's kind of, again, more that kind of that age range, or people that are particularly kind of endurance athletes, or people that are highly active, or those that are on like hypocaloric deficits for quite a long time. So whether they're doing it for a sporting reason, or whether they're doing it for their own just dietary reasons, they're trying to lose weight, often you'll just find that they'll kind of whip out a load of calories but not necessarily look where it's from, and that does run the risk of becoming protein deficient.
So we're seeing this move away from, traditionally we think proteins, big red steaks and red meats and the types, and now we're looking at different sources for that. It was interesting the bit you were talking about poultry, chicken, filling that gap. Is that part of that convenience as well? Chicken's flexible on different.
Yeah, it's definitely about meal versatility. So you can take a chicken breast and do a lot more with it than you probably can with a particular cut of meat. And obviously we've seen through the current pandemic that people are moving from high-end cuts of red meat to mince. So you can see that mince is more versatile, but also more affordable. And I think although chicken's still quite expensive, it just gives you more options. So if you've got it in the fridge, you can do different things as you wish. Yeah.
Thanks. The other way, do you think there's anything, maybe this is a question for the immediate situation where we're in lockdown and we're home. Do you think some of the changes we might have because of the COVID pandemic will change our look at diet? I mean, you commented on some of the bits from Kantar. What do you think the role of protein in that is?
There's some attributes that you hope would kind of continue, that more baking at home and less ready meals as a health kind of standpoint. Whether when we go back to some kind of normality that convenience just takes over because the day kind of becomes a bit chaotic again. But I certainly think that health is going to be put much more at the forefront of people's minds, whether again they follow through with it, but it's just going to be there. So I think again there's also that aspiration. So again, protein is often kind of associated with athleticism or active individuals, whether you are or not. But it has that kind of that association.
Okay, thanks. I was just looking at Phil. I think Phil's got a very good point here. Use of the phrase waste stream products is not positive. We should be focusing on the concept of full realization of the raw products and value. Completely agree with that. Absolutely. And looking at the wider.
I think that's what we said about potato, isn't it? It's utilising the full product, not just what we do at the moment.
Yeah, and that's a great mindset to be looking at any system. If you think of where whey has come from being the waste stream or from a cheese process, I think whey actually is more, correct me if I'm wrong, whey has more value now than the than the cheese does. And that just shows flipping the concept of where the value is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So great. Well, unless anyone's got any other questions, I'll give you a second if you're really dying to ask something. I hope that's been a really useful snapshot of the world of proteins in all its forms. From our point of view as Future Foods, we look at collaborative projects exploring innovative new products, underlying science behind those with our partners at Aberystwyth, and we'd really welcome any conversations around any new project ideas. And equally through NutriWales, where we bring together interested parties around topic areas through special interest groups. If there's areas you're particularly interested in, again, around the proteins broadly, do contact myself or Louise around that. I think the area around insects we're interested in. We know that there's some projects going on, European projects around that area, but across the board, yeah, please be in contact. I know that this has been recorded, so that'll be sending out shortly, as will this, with the slide pack with a couple of extra slides in there. So, you know, I hope you find it useful, and we have another seminar next week. We're looking at CBD oils next week, different topic, and then we're looking the week after that. We've got a busy calendar around microbiome and gut health. So again, we'll send out the details around that, and if that's of interest, it'd be great if you could join us. Right, I'll bring it to a close there. So thank you, panelists. Thank you very much, Natalie and Louise, and we'll speak again soon.